I never imagined becoming someone who swears they encountered a Sasquatch in the wilderness. Yet here, I sit in my cramped studio apartment, staring at a cup of reheated tea that's gone cold again, attempting to describe something that fundamentally altered how I understand reality. I'm 53 years old now, and in the 4 years since my wife passed away from cancer, the mountains have become my refuge, the singular place where the crushing weight of loneliness doesn't completely suffocate me. We used to explore these rugged trails together every chance we got, sometimes camping for entire weekends just to be surrounded by the towering pines and ancient rock formations. After she died, I kept returning to those same peaks and valleys, desperately searching for some trace of her presence, some connection to the life we'd built together. What I discovered instead was something that defied every rational explanation I'd ever relied upon, something that proved to me beyond any doubt that we exist within a world far stranger and more populated than most people realize. It began simply enough. Just another Sunday morning trek through the dense wilderness, approximately 35 miles from where I live. The trail system wasn't heavily trafficked, which appealed to me greatly. I craved isolation, or at least I convinced myself that solitude was what I needed during those dark months. The spring wildflowers were just beginning to bloom along the path, and the cool mountain air carried the scent of snowmelt and fresh cedar. I'd been hiking for roughly 90 minutes when I first experienced that peculiar sensation crawling up my spine, that unmistakable instinct that tells you you're being observed. I froze in place and scanned my surroundings carefully, examining the dense undergrowth and towering trees, but detected nothing unusual aside from the ordinary chipmunks and ravens conducting their daily routines. I dismissed the feeling as paranoia and continued upward along the rocky trail, but that awareness of being watched never dissipated. Throughout the following several weeks, each time I ventured into these mountains, I'd experienced that identical sensation, invisible eyes tracking my every movement through the wilderness. Initially, I rationalized it as perhaps a mountain lion or an opportunistic black bear, but the intensity felt different, more focused and intentional. Whatever lurked out there wasn't merely passing through its territory, it was deliberately following me, studying me. I began paying much closer attention to my surroundings, stopping abruptly to glance backward, taking alternate routes to determine whether the sensation would vanish. It never did. Then one morning in early June, I finally glimpsed it. I'd paused to catch my breath near a massive granite outcropping when I detected movement in my peripheral vision. Something rapidly ducking behind a towering Douglas fir, approximately 40 feet. Upslope from where I stood, the movement possessed too much speed and deliberation to be any normal animal. My pulse accelerated as I slowly rotated my head, pretending I hadn't registered anything unusual. When I casually glanced back several seconds later, I saw it distinctly, a compact, dark figure peering around the enormous trunk, observing me with unmistakable curiosity. The Sasquatch was small. I could determine that much immediately. It stood perhaps 5 feet 8 inches tall, covered in reddish-brown fur that appeared thick and somewhat matted. Its face displayed remarkable expressiveness, with penetrating eyes that radiated an almost human quality of intelligence and awareness. The creature wasn't enormous, like the legendary beasts described in sensational documentaries and campfire tales. This one seemed closer to my own stature, more slender and athletic in appearance. When our gazes connected directly, the Sasquatch immediately withdrew behind the tree, and I heard soft rustling sounds as it retreated deeper into the forest. I remained absolutely motionless for several long minutes, my water bottle completely forgotten in my trembling hand. My analytical mind attempted desperately to rationalize what I'd witnessed. Perhaps it was some eccentric person wearing an elaborate costume. Perhaps I was experiencing hallucinations. Perhaps grief had finally pushed me beyond the edge of sanity, but somewhere deep in my gut, I understood exactly what I'd seen. That brief glimpse had been sufficient to recognize that whatever hid behind that tree wasn't human, wasn't a bear, wasn't anything I could conveniently dismiss or explain away. A Sasquatch had been real and tangible, and it had been watching me with undeniable interest. That night, I lay awake until dawn, my mind churning with questions and impossible scenarios. Should I report this to someone official? Would anyone possibly believe my account? Should I return to those mountains? Or should I discover completely different hiking locations? Part of me felt genuinely terrified, but another part, a part I couldn't fully comprehend yet, felt intensely curious. The Sasquatch hadn't displayed any aggression or threatening behavior. If anything, it had appeared timid, almost as curious about me as I felt about it. When Sunday morning arrived again, I found myself driving back to that identical trailhead, completely unable to resist the magnetic pull of that mysterious encounter. For the first 90 minutes of my hike, everything appeared perfectly normal. I walked the familiar switchbacks and ridgelines, listening to the bird song and feeling the strengthening June sunshine warming my shoulders. I'd nearly convinced myself that I'd somehow imagined the entire incident when I heard a branch crack somewhere behind me. I turned slowly, and there it stood, the Sasquatch positioned roughly 25 feet away, partially concealed behind a cluster of mountain laurel bushes. This time, it didn't flee. We stared at each other for what seemed like hours, neither of us moving, both carefully assessing the situation. The Sasquatch took one tentative step in my direction, and I instinctively stepped backward. It halted immediately, and I could have sworn I detected something resembling disappointment flicker across its features. We remained frozen in this strange standoff for several long minutes, and then, to my absolute astonishment, the Sasquatch opened its mouth and vocalized. The word emerged rough and labored, like someone struggling to master a foreign language, but it was completely unmistakable. The Sasquatch said, "Hello." My legs nearly collapsed beneath me. I grasped a nearby sapling for support, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might explode from my ribcage. The Sasquatch had spoken to me in English. It had actually formed a recognizable word and addressed me directly. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound emerged. I attempted again, my voice shaking so severely I barely recognized it as my own. I managed to whisper hoarsely, "How is this possible? How can you speak?" The Sasquatch took another small step closer, its movements careful and measured as if approaching a frightened animal. When it spoke again, the words came slowly, separated by lengthy pauses as it searched for the correct sounds. The Sasquatch said, "Listen, you." Many seasons. Its voice possessed a deeper quality than I'd anticipated, with an unusual resonance that seemed to originate from somewhere profound within its chest. The Sasquatch gestured vaguely toward the surrounding wilderness, then tapped the side of its head with one elongated finger. I struggled desperately to process what was occurring. The Sasquatch was informing me it had learned human speech by listening to people, by observing hikers and campers over extended periods of time. But how long had it been listening? How many years had this been spent in these mountains, silently observing, absorbing our language and studying our behaviors? As if sensing my confusion, the Sasquatch vocalized again, tapping its chest this time. It said, "Not young, small body, old spirit." The Sasquatch gestured to itself, then spread its arms wide, indicating something much larger and more imposing, before bringing them back to reference its own compact frame. Understanding gradually crystallized in my consciousness. This Sasquatch wasn't young at all, despite its smaller stature. It was diminutive for its species, perhaps, but it had existed for an extraordinarily long time. The creature had witnessed these mountains transform through decades, or possibly centuries, had observed countless humans passing through its territory, had absorbed our language over an incomprehensible span of time. The Sasquatch took another step forward, and this time I didn't retreat. Something in its eyes, in the gentle way it carried itself, communicated that I had absolutely nothing to fear from this being. That first genuine encounter lasted perhaps 30 minutes. We didn't exchange many words. The Sasquatch's vocabulary was severely limited, and I remained too shocked to formulate coherent sentences. But something profound passed between us during that time, some mutual recognition that neither of us was quite as isolated as we'd believed. When the Sasquatch finally turned to depart, disappearing back into the forest with surprising grace and silence, I felt a strange sense of loss wash over me. I'd discovered something precious and completely unexpected, and I wasn't prepared to release it. I returned the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. Each time, the Sasquatch would materialize at some point during my hike, always cautious initially, always observing carefully to verify I was alone before approaching closer. Our meetings developed a kind of natural rhythm. I would hike upward along the trails. The Sasquatch would follow at a respectful distance, and eventually we would stop somewhere peaceful and simply exist together for a while. The Sasquatch gradually became more comfortable vocalizing, incorporating new words into its limited vocabulary, though it never quite managed complete sentences. One afternoon in late June, as we rested on a fallen log overlooking a pristine alpine meadow, the Sasquatch reached out and gently touched my hand. The contact startled me initially, but the creature's touch was surprisingly gentle, almost tender. It pointed to me, then to itself, then made a gesture that seemed to encompass the entire forest around us. The Sasquatch said, "All one, all connected." It was attempting to communicate something profound, something about the interconnectedness of all living things. Over the following months, these encounters became the focal point of my entire existence. I lived for those Sunday mornings when I could escape into the mountains and spend time with my extraordinary friend, because that's what the Sasquatch had become, a friend, perhaps the most genuine friend I'd ever known. The creature never judged me, never demanded anything from me, never made me feel inadequate or broken. It simply accepted me exactly as I was, a grieving middle-aged man trying desperately to find meaning in a world that had become almost unbearably empty. The Sasquatch taught me things during those months together, lessons I don't think I could have learned any other way. It showed me how to truly observe the forest, not just walk through it blindly. It taught me to recognize the subtle signs of animal passage, the way deer create specific trails through the undergrowth, the way bears mark their territory on certain trees, the way birds communicate danger to each other through their calls. The Sasquatch demonstrated how to move silently through the wilderness, how to place my feet carefully to avoid snapping branches, how to use the wind to mask my scent, how to become part of the landscape rather than an intruder within it. But more importantly, the Sasquatch taught me about patience and presence. In our modern world, we're constantly rushing, constantly thinking about the past or worrying about the future, rarely fully present in the actual moment we're living. The Sasquatch existed entirely in the present. It didn't seem to carry regrets about yesterday or anxieties about tomorrow. It was simply here now, fully engaged with whatever was happening in this exact moment. I remember one particular afternoon when we were sitting beside a small creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. I was lost in my thoughts, thinking about my wife, about all the things I should have said or done differently, all the moments I'd wasted being distracted or preoccupied. The Sasquatch reached over and placed its hand on my shoulder, pulling me back to the present moment. It pointed to the creek and said, "Water moves, not stops. You same." The creature was telling me that I needed to keep moving forward, like the water in the creek. Water doesn't stop flowing because it encounters obstacles. It simply finds a way around them and continues onward. I was holding onto my grief like a boulder, letting it block the natural flow of my life. The Sasquatch was gently suggesting that I needed to let that grief flow through me and past me, rather than damming it up inside. This was difficult wisdom to accept, but I understood the truth in it. Another profound lesson came when the Sasquatch showed me how it gathered food. I'd always assumed these creatures were primarily hunters, aggressive predators taking down elk and deer. But the Sasquatch I knew was largely a forager, gathering berries, nuts, roots, and various plants. It moved through the forest with encyclopedic knowledge, knowing exactly which plants were edible, which had medicinal properties, which should be avoided entirely. One afternoon, the Sasquatch showed me a particular root that could ease stomach pain. Another time, it pointed out a moss that could be used to stop bleeding. The creature possessed more practical knowledge about wilderness survival than any human I'd ever encountered. But what struck me most profoundly was how the Sasquatch harvested these resources. It never took more than it needed. If it found a berry bush heavy with fruit, it would take only a small portion, leaving plenty for other animals and ensuring the plant could continue producing. If it dug up roots, it would carefully replant portions to ensure future growth. The Sasquatch lived in perfect balance with its environment, taking what it needed while ensuring the forest's health and abundance. This was such a stark contrast to how humans typically interact with nature, taking everything we can, depleting resources without thought for tomorrow, or for other species that depend on those same resources. The Sasquatch's way of living demonstrated a profound respect for the natural world, an understanding that we're not separate from nature, but deeply embedded within it, dependent on its health for our own survival. I also learned about the Sasquatch's social nature, or rather its lack of constant social contact. The creature seemed to live primarily in solitude, though it hinted at others of its kind existing in the vast wilderness. It used a word that sounded like kin when referring to other Sasquatch, suggesting it was aware of their presence even if it didn't interact with them regularly. The Sasquatch explained, as best as it could with limited vocabulary, that its kind valued independence and solitude, coming together only occasionally for specific purposes. This resonated deeply with me, as I'd always been somewhat introverted myself, preferring deep connections with a few individuals rather than superficial relationships with many. The Sasquatch seemed to have chosen me deliberately, not randomly. Out of all the hikers who passed through these mountains, it had selected me to observe, to approach, to befriend. I often wondered why. What had it seen in me that made it take such a risk? The Sasquatch couldn't explain this in words, but I came to believe it had recognized something in me. A similar loneliness, perhaps, a kindred spirit seeking connection in unexpected places. As summer progressed into early autumn, our friendship deepened considerably. We developed a kind of communication that transcended words, a mutual understanding built on observation and intuition. I learned to read the Sasquatch's body language, to understand what its various sounds and gestures meant. Similarly, it became remarkably adept at reading my emotional state, sensing when I was struggling with grief or when I simply needed silent companionship. One particularly memorable encounter occurred in late September. I'd been having an especially difficult week, the anniversary of my wife's death approaching and stirring up all the pain I thought I'd begun to process. I hiked into the mountains feeling absolutely wretched, tears streaming down my face as I walked. The Sasquatch appeared earlier than usual, stepping directly onto the trail in front of me rather than observing from a distance first. It looked at me for a long moment, those penetrating eyes seeming to see directly into my soul. Then, without a word, it stepped forward and wrapped its arms around me in what I can only describe as a hug. I broke down completely, sobbing against the Sasquatch's chest while it held me firmly, but gently, making soft, rumbling sounds deep in its throat that were somehow incredibly comforting. We stood like that for I don't know how long, this impossible creature offering comfort to a broken man in the middle of the wilderness. When I finally regained some composure, the Sasquatch released me and gently wiped the tears from my face with its rough fingers. It said, "She here, always here." The creature placed one hand over my heart, then swept its other arm wide to encompass the forest around us. The Sasquatch was telling me that my wife wasn't truly gone, that she was still present in the world around me, in the trees and mountains we'd loved together, in my heart and memories. This brought me more comfort than months of well-meaning condolences from friends and family ever had. The Sasquatch understood grief in a way that transcended words, and its simple gesture of compassion meant everything to me. As autumn deepened and the aspen leaves turned brilliant gold, I began bringing small offerings on my hikes. Nothing elaborate or expensive, just things I thought the Sasquatch might enjoy or find interesting. I brought a small hand mirror, which fascinated the creature endlessly. It spent nearly an hour examining its own reflection, making different expressions and watching how its face changed. I brought a harmonica, and though the Sasquatch couldn't quite figure out how to play it properly, it enjoyed the sounds it could produce. I brought various snacks, curious to see what foods the creature might like beyond its normal forest diet. The Sasquatch seemed especially intrigued by dried mango, which it chewed thoughtfully before making an approving sound. But its absolute favorite was peanut butter. The first time I offered it a spoonful, the Sasquatch's eyes widened with what I can only describe as delight. It savored that peanut butter like it was the finest delicacy imaginable, and from that point forward, I always brought a jar along on my hikes. Watching the Sasquatch enjoy peanut butter became one of my simple pleasures, a reminder that joy can be found in the smallest, most unexpected things. The creature also began bringing me gifts in return, though these were very different from my offerings. The Sasquatch would present me with interesting stones, feathers from rare birds, pieces of wood with unusual shapes or grain patterns. Each gift was given with obvious care, the Sasquatch watching my reaction closely to ensure I appreciated what it was offering. I treasured these gifts more than anything I owned. They weren't valuable in any monetary sense, but they represented something far more precious, the friendship and trust of a being that most people refused to believe even existed. I kept these items in a small wooden box in my apartment, and sometimes when I was feeling particularly disconnected from the world, I would take them out and hold them, remembering the moments when each was given. One particularly significant gift came in early October. The Sasquatch led me to a secluded spot deep in the forest, farther from the main trails than we'd ever ventured before. There, growing in a small clearing, was a cluster of unusual mushrooms, glowing faintly with bioluminescence. The Sasquatch carefully harvested one and handed it to me, saying, "Light in dark." Like you, I understood the metaphor immediately. The creature was telling me that I brought light into its dark existence, that my presence and friendship illuminated its solitary life the way these mushrooms illuminated the dark forest. I was deeply moved by this gesture, by the profound sentiment expressed through such simple words and actions. I carefully preserved that mushroom, drying it and keeping it in my box of treasures alongside the stones and feathers. The Sasquatch also showed me its dwelling place during those autumn months, an enormous privilege I fully recognized. The creature led me to a remote area where massive boulders had tumbled together to form a natural cave. Inside this shelter, the ground was covered with soft plant material and animal furs, creating a surprisingly comfortable resting place. The walls were decorated with what appeared to be deliberate arrangements of colorful stones, bundles of bird feathers, and pieces of bark displaying interesting natural patterns. The Sasquatch had clearly collected these items because they pleased its aesthetic sense, evidence of an artistic sensibility I hadn't expected. The creature watched me examine its home with obvious vulnerability and pride. This was where it spent its nights, where it rested and dreamed, where it was most defenseless. By revealing this place to me, The Sasquatch was demonstrating absolute trust. It said, "My place, you come if need." The creature was offering me sanctuary, telling me that if I ever required shelter or safety in the wilderness, I could come to this location and it would be there for me. I was profoundly moved by this offering. Throughout all our months of friendship, the Sasquatch had never asked anything from me. It had only given, teaching me, protecting me when I unknowingly wandered into dangerous areas, sharing its wisdom and quiet companionship. And now it was giving me even more, opening up the most private part of its existence to me. I thanked the creature as best I could with my inadequate human words, trying to convey how much its trust and friendship meant to me, how it had quite literally saved my life by giving me a reason to keep going during my darkest period. As October progressed into November, I began to sense a change in the Sasquatch's demeanor. It seemed more contemplative, more withdrawn, though still friendly and affectionate. Sometimes I would catch it staring off into the distance with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between sadness and longing. I asked if something was wrong, but the creature struggled to explain, lacking the vocabulary to express whatever it was feeling. Then one grey November morning, as we sat together watching fog roll through the valley below, the Sasquatch finally managed to communicate what had been troubling it. It pointed to itself, then made a sweeping gesture toward the distant mountains, farther than I'd ever ventured. It said, "Must go. Time come." My heart sank. The creature was telling me it needed to leave, that it was time for it to move on to somewhere else. I wanted to ask why, wanted to beg it to stay, but I understood somehow that this departure was necessary, inevitable. The Sasquatch had its own life, its own rhythms and requirements that I couldn't fully understand. I asked when it would leave, dreading the answer. The creature held up both hands, opening and closing them several times. I interpreted this as meaning several days, perhaps a week or two. The Sasquatch wanted to spend a bit more time with me before departing, wanted to say goodbye properly rather than simply vanishing. Over those final days together, every moment felt precious and bittersweet. We revisited our favorite spots, the alpine meadow where we'd first truly connected, the creek where the Sasquatch had taught me about letting grief flow, the rocky outcropping where I'd first glimpsed the creature all those months ago. Each location held memories now, tangible reminders of the extraordinary friendship we'd formed. The Sasquatch seemed determined to share as much knowledge as possible in our remaining time together, as if trying to pack in all the lessons it hadn't yet had time to teach me. It showed me how to predict weather changes by observing cloud formations and animal behavior. It demonstrated how to find water even in apparently dry areas by watching where birds flew in the early morning. It taught me which stars to follow for navigation if I ever became lost. All of this practical knowledge was valuable, but what I treasured most was simply spending time in the creature's presence, absorbing its calm strength and gentle wisdom. One afternoon, the Sasquatch did something it had never done before. It attempted to teach me its own language, or at least a portion of it. The creature made a series of low, resonant sounds, then pointed to a tree. It repeated the sounds until I attempted to mimic them, which apparently amused the Sasquatch greatly, as it made its huffing laughter sound at my clumsy efforts. But it patiently corrected my pronunciation until I could produce something approximating the correct sound. The Sasquatch then taught me sounds for water, stone, sky, and several other basic elements. I practiced these diligently, wanting to have some piece of the creature's world that I could carry with me. On what I somehow knew would be our final day together, the Sasquatch led me to a high ridge overlooking vast wilderness stretching to the horizon. We sat side by side as the sun began setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The creature was quiet for a long time, and I didn't disturb the silence, understanding that it was processing the upcoming separation in its own way. Finally, as twilight deepened, the Sasquatch turned to me and spoke more words at once than I'd ever heard it string together. It said, "You teach me too. Alone, long time. You show friend possible. Different, not matter." I realized with a start that our friendship had been just as meaningful for the Sasquatch as it had been for me. The creature had been alone for decades, perhaps centuries, observing humans but never connecting with them. I had shown it that true friendship could transcend species boundaries, that our differences didn't matter when genuine affection and respect were present. The Sasquatch reached into a small pouch it sometimes carried, woven from plant fibers, and pulled out a smooth stone, unlike any I'd seen before. It was dark green with veins of gold running through it, almost certainly some rare mineral specimen. The creature pressed this stone into my palm and closed my fingers around it. It said, "Carry me. I carry you. Always." The Sasquatch was telling me that even though we were separating physically, we would carry each other in our hearts and memories forever. The bond we'd formed was permanent, unbreakable by distance or time. I pulled out something I'd brought specifically for this moment, a photograph of my wife and me taken on one of our happiest days together, hiking in these very mountains. I'd been carrying it throughout all our encounters, but had never shown it to the Sasquatch before. I handed it to the creature and explained as best I could who she was, how much I'd loved her, how her death had broken me, and how the Sasquatch's friendship had helped me heal. The creature studied the photograph carefully, then looked at me with such profound understanding and compassion that I felt tears welling up again. It carefully folded the photograph and tucked it into its pouch, then placed both hands on my shoulders. The Sasquatch said, "She proud, you strong, you good." Those simple words, that straightforward affirmation from this impossible being, touched me more deeply than I can express. The Sasquatch believed I was strong and good, despite all my flaws and failures. It believed my wife would be proud of how I'd survived her loss and slowly rebuilt my life. Coming from the creature, this validation felt completely genuine and deeply meaningful. We stayed on that ridge until full darkness fell, neither of us wanting to let go of these final moments together. Eventually, the Sasquatch stood and helped me to my feet. It embraced me one last time, that same comforting hug it had given me months earlier when I'd been breaking down on the trail. I held on to the creature tightly, memorizing the feel of its fur, the sound of its breathing, the earthy forest scent that always surrounded it. When we finally separated, the Sasquatch placed one hand over my heart, then over its own heart, then pointed to the stars above us. It was telling me that we would remain connected through that same universal force that connects all living things, that invisible web of consciousness and energy that flows through everything. The creature turned and began walking toward the dark forest, pausing once to look back at me. I raised my hand in farewell, and the Sasquatch mirrored the gesture. Then it disappeared into the shadows, moving with that characteristic grace and silence, leaving me alone on the ridge. I stood there for a long time after it vanished, clutching the green stone it had given me, feeling the weight of that final goodbye settling into my bones. The walk back down to the trailhead seemed impossibly long and lonely, every shadow making me hope irrationally that the Sasquatch had changed its mind and come back. But deep down, I knew it was truly gone, embarked on whatever journey or purpose called it away from these mountains. In the weeks and months that followed, I continued hiking those same trails every Sunday, partly hoping I might encounter the Sasquatch again, partly simply because the mountains had become essential to my well-being. I never saw the creature again, but sometimes I would find small signs that made me wonder if it was checking on me from a distance. An unusual stone placed on a fallen log I frequented, a pattern of broken branches that seemed deliberately arranged, a patch of mushrooms that hadn't been there the day before. I couldn't be certain these were messages from my friend, but I chose to believe they were, that the Sasquatch was letting me know it remembered me and was watching over me even from far away. I never told anyone about my experiences. Who would believe such a story? Most people would dismiss me as delusional or attention-seeking. A few might believe but would want me to lead them to the Sasquatch, to prove its existence, perhaps to capture or study it. I couldn't and wouldn't betray my friend that way. The Sasquatch had trusted me with something precious, its existence and its friendship, and I would guard that trust absolutely. Instead, I carry these memories and lessons silently, letting them shape how I live my life. I try to move through the world with the same quiet grace and awareness the Sasquatch demonstrated. I attempt to live in better balance with nature, taking only what I need, respecting all living things, recognizing my place within the larger web of existence. I practice being more present in each moment rather than constantly dwelling in past regrets or future anxieties. These lessons have transformed me in ways I'm still discovering, made me into a better version of myself than I was before. I think about specific moments from our time together constantly, each one a treasure I revisit in my mind. I remember the first time the Sasquatch spoke to me, that rough, hesitant hello that shattered my understanding of what was possible. I remember the afternoon it showed me its dwelling place, trusting me with its most vulnerable space. I remember watching it laugh after falling into the stream, that pure, unself-conscious joy in a silly moment. I remember the way it comforted me when I was drowning in grief, holding me without judgment while I fell apart. I remember our last evening together on the ridge, watching the sunset and saying goodbye to the most extraordinary friend I've ever known. That green stone the Sasquatch gave me sits on my desk where I can see it every day. Sometimes when I'm feeling disconnected or overwhelmed, I hold that stone and remember that afternoon when the creature first tried peanut butter and its eyes lit up with such delight. I remember the quiet companionship of sitting together beside the creek, not needing words because our understanding transcended language. The stone is just a stone, a mineral specimen with no monetary value, but it represents something far more precious, proof that our encounters were real, that the connection we formed was genuine, that magic and wonder still exist in this world if we remain open to discovering them. There was also that significant occasion when the Sasquatch taught me about death and natural cycles. We'd come across a dead squirrel on the trail, likely killed by a hawk. I felt sad seeing it, but the Sasquatch picked up the small body gently and carried it to a sunny spot beside the path. The creature placed the squirrel carefully on the ground and gestured for me to sit beside it. For several minutes, we sat in silence, simply observing the dead animal. Then the Sasquatch began pointing out things I hadn't noticed. The insects already beginning to break down the squirrel's body, returning its nutrients to the soil. The way the sun warmed the body, accelerating its decomposition. The seeds caught in its fur that would be released as the body dissolved into the earth. The Sasquatch said, "Not end, change, give back." It was showing me that death wasn't an ending, but a transformation, a giving back to the forest that had sustained the squirrel during its life. The creature picked up a handful of soil and let it run through its fingers. It said, "Dirt here, tree here, you here, she here, all same, all connected." The Sasquatch was explaining that death doesn't sever connections, it simply transforms them. My wife's body had returned to the earth, but the atoms that had composed her were still present, part of the soil and the trees and the air I breathed. In that sense, she was literally all around me, part of the wilderness we'd loved exploring together. This understanding brought me tremendous peace. a final releasing of the grief that had crushed me for so long. I finally accepted that my wife wasn't truly gone, just changed into a different form, still present and still connected to me through that universal energy that flows through all living things. I also vividly recall the afternoon the Sasquatch taught me about laughter and finding joy. We were crossing a shallow stream, stepping carefully from rock to rock, when the creature suddenly slipped and fell backward into the water with a tremendous splash. I gasped, worried it had injured itself. But the Sasquatch just sat there in the stream and started making a sound I'd never heard before, a wheezing, huffing noise that I realized was laughter. The creature was laughing at itself, at the absurdity of its clumsy tumble, completely unself-conscious and delighted. I started laughing too, and soon we were both laughing so hard we could barely breathe. The Sasquatch climbed out of the stream, water dripping from its fur, and shook itself vigorously like a dog, spraying me with cold droplets. This just made us laugh harder. It was such a simple moment, so trivial and unimportant in the grand scheme of things, but it reminded me that joy doesn't require grand occasions or special circumstances. Joy can be found in a clumsy fall into a stream, in shared laughter, in the simple pleasure of being alive and present with a friend. After that day, the Sasquatch seemed more playful with me overall. It would hide behind trees and then jump out, trying to startle me. It would pick up interesting objects and present them to me with exaggerated ceremony, making me laugh. It would imitate my walking style, exaggerating my human clumsiness through the forest. These moments of play were just as important as the profound lessons about death and connection. They reminded me not to take everything so seriously, to find delight in small things, to let myself be foolish and free. One of my strongest memories before the Sasquatch told me it had to leave involves a severe thunderstorm. We'd been hiking when dark clouds rolled in faster than anticipated, and soon lightning was flashing across the sky, accompanied by deafening thunder. I was frightened. Being exposed on a mountain during a lightning storm seemed incredibly dangerous, but the Sasquatch remained perfectly calm. It took my hand and led me to a spot beneath a tall rock face that provided shelter from the rain. As we sat there watching the storm, the Sasquatch pointed to the lightning and said, "Sky speaking, earth listening." With each lightning flash, I could feel a vibration in the ground beneath us, a response from the earth to the sky's electric display. The Sasquatch was showing me that storms weren't random violence, but a kind of dialogue between earth and sky, a necessary exchange of energy that sustained the forest's life. The creature seemed to find the storm beautiful, even thrilling, and gradually its calm enthusiasm spread to me. By the time the storm passed, I was no longer afraid. I was awed by the raw power and beauty of nature's fury. These memories, these moments with the Sasquatch, are more precious to me than I can adequately express. Each encounter taught me something new, opened my eyes a little wider, helped me remember truths I'd forgotten or never known. The Sasquatch was patient with my slow learning, generous with its time and wisdom, and always kind, even when I was stubborn or afraid. I don't know what I did to deserve such a friend, such a teacher. I only know that meeting the creature was the greatest gift I've ever received, an experience that fundamentally changed who I am and how I understand the world. Looking back now, I realize there were so many other significant moments with the Sasquatch that shaped who I've become, moments that deserve to be remembered and honored. There was the time in early July when the creature taught me about patience and observation in ways I'd never understood before. We were sitting quietly in a small clearing when the Sasquatch suddenly raised one finger to its lips, signaling me to remain absolutely silent and still. At first, I couldn't understand what we were waiting for, but the creature's intense focus told me something important was happening. We sat motionless for nearly 40 minutes, and I was beginning to feel restless when finally a family of foxes emerged from the underbrush. a mother with 3 young kits, playing and tumbling over each other in the clearing, completely unaware of our presence. The Sasquatch watched them with such tenderness and delight, occasionally glancing at me to ensure I was witnessing this moment. The fox family stayed for perhaps 20 minutes, the kits chasing each other and pouncing on imaginary prey while their mother kept watch. When they finally disappeared back into the forest, the Sasquatch turned to me with an expression of profound satisfaction. It said, "Wait brings gift. Rush misses everything." The creature was teaching me that patience isn't passive or boring. It's an active practice that allows us to witness the hidden magic of the natural world. In our hurried modern lives, we rush past so much beauty and wonder simply because we're too impatient to slow down and pay attention. The Sasquatch also taught me about territorial awareness and respect during our time together. One afternoon, we were hiking through an area I'd never explored before when the creature suddenly stopped and grabbed my arm, pulling me backward. It pointed to a cluster of trees ahead, then made a series of low growls and aggressive gestures. I was confused until the Sasquatch picked up a stone and threw it toward the trees. Immediately, a massive black bear emerged, clearly agitated by our presence. The creature kept me behind its body, positioning itself between me and the bear, and made a series of vocalizations I'd never heard before. The sounds were deeper and more resonant than its normal speech, clearly directed at the bear rather than at me. To my amazement, the bear seemed to understand. It huffed and swayed for a moment, then turned and lumbered back into the forest. The Sasquatch waited until the bear was completely gone before relaxing its protective stance. It explained as best it could that we had wandered into the bear's territory during a time when it had cubs nearby. The bear was simply protecting its young, which was its right and responsibility. The Sasquatch had communicated to the bear that we meant no harm and would leave the area immediately, which we did. This encounter taught me that the forest isn't just beautiful scenery, it's home to countless creatures with their own territories, families, and needs. We humans often forget this, trampling through wilderness areas with no consideration for the beings who actually live there. The Sasquatch understood and respected these boundaries implicitly, and it was trying to teach me to do the same. I remember another profound lesson about plant intelligence and communication that the Sasquatch shared with me. We were walking through an area dense with old-growth trees when the creature stopped beside an enormous pine that must have been hundreds of years old. It placed both hands flat against the trunk and stood motionless for several minutes, eyes closed, breathing deeply. Then it gestured for me to do the same. I felt somewhat foolish, but I placed my hands on the rough bark and tried to still my mind. At first, I felt nothing unusual, just the texture of the bark and the solidness of the tree. But as I stood there longer, breathing slowly and trying to quiet my internal chatter, I began to sense something I couldn't quite explain. A kind of subtle energy or presence. A sense that the tree was somehow aware, somehow alive in ways I'd never considered. The Sasquatch opened its eyes and looked at me with an expression that suggested it knew I'd felt something, however faint. It said, "Trees talk underground. Share food, share warning, share life." The creature was describing what scientists have only recently begun to understand about the mycorrhizal networks that connect trees underground, allowing them to share nutrients and chemical signals. But the Sasquatch had known this for far longer than science had, understood it not through study, but through direct experience and observation. It taught me that trees aren't isolated individuals competing for resources, but members of a vast community that shares and supports each other. The old trees feed the young ones. Trees warn each other of insect infestations or disease. They literally share life with each other through these underground connections. This knowledge completely changed how I viewed forests. When I look at a woodland now, I don't see a collection of individual trees. I see a single superorganism. a community of interconnected beings communicating and cooperating in ways invisible to casual human observation. The Sasquatch helped me understand that intelligence and consciousness exist in forms very different from human cognition, and that we're surrounded by awareness and intention in the natural world if we're humble enough to recognize it. There was also a memorable day when the creature taught me about tracking and reading signs in the wilderness. We came across tracks in soft mud near a stream, and the Sasquatch knelt down to examine them closely. It traced the prints with one finger, then looked up at me and began a detailed explanation of what these tracks revealed. From the depth and spacing of the prints, the creature could tell it was a young elk, probably male based on the size. From the way the prints were arranged, it was moving at a leisurely pace, not fleeing from anything. From the freshness of the tracks and the amount of water seepage into the impressions, they'd been made approximately 3 hours earlier. From scratch marks on a nearby tree trunk, the elk had paused here to rub its antlers. The Sasquatch could read these signs the way I might read a detailed written report, extracting information I couldn't begin to perceive. It patiently taught me what to look for, how to distinguish between different types of tracks, how to judge the age of a trail, how to understand the story that tracks tell about an animal's behavior and intentions. Over time, I became somewhat competent at this, though I never approached the Sasquatch's level of skill. But even basic tracking ability transformed my wilderness experiences completely. The forest was no longer silent and empty. It was full of stories written in mud and snow and broken branches, stories about who had passed through and when and why. Every hike became an adventure in reading these signs, understanding the invisible activities that filled the forest even when I wasn't there to witness them directly. I also cherish the memory of the afternoon the Sasquatch taught me about edible plants in the region. The creature had extensive knowledge of which plants were nutritious, which had medicinal properties, which could be eaten raw, and which required preparation. It showed me wild onions growing near the stream, demonstrating how to identify them by their distinctive smell and shape. It pointed out dandelion greens, explaining through gestures that the young leaves were best for eating while the older ones became too bitter. The Sasquatch showed me how to identify and harvest wild berries without damaging the plants, how to find nutritious roots and tubers, how to recognize the nuts from different tree species. It demonstrated which fungi were safe to eat and which were deadly poisonous, using a stick to point out the subtle differences in cap color and gill structure that distinguished edible varieties from toxic ones. This knowledge was incredibly practical. If I ever became lost or stranded in the wilderness, I would now be able to find food rather than starving surrounded by abundance I didn't know how to recognize or use. But beyond the practical value, this education represented something deeper. The Sasquatch was sharing knowledge its kind had accumulated over countless generations, wisdom about living in harmony with the forest rather than constantly fighting against it or feeling separate from it. Another significant teaching involved understanding animal behavior and communication. The Sasquatch could interpret the calls of birds and the movements of small mammals in ways that revealed vast amounts of information. When ravens called in a certain pattern, it meant a predator was nearby. When squirrels chattered and flicked their tails in a particular way, it indicated a threat approaching. When deer suddenly froze and stared in one direction, it revealed the presence of something dangerous that direction. The creature taught me to pay attention to these signals, to let the other inhabitants of the forest serve as an early warning system. Animals who lived here full-time knew the patterns and dangers far better than any human visitor ever could, and if we were wise enough to listen to them, they would keep us safe. I remember watching the Sasquatch interpret a complex series of bird calls one afternoon, tracking the progress of a mountain lion moving through the forest a quarter-mile away simply by listening to how the birds reacted and passed the warning along. The creature never saw the lion directly, but it knew exactly where it was and where it was going, based entirely on reading these natural communication networks. This ability seemed almost supernatural to me, but the Sasquatch explained it was simply a matter of paying attention and learning the language of the forest. Any human could develop similar skills if they spent enough time observing and listening rather than trampling through nature while absorbed in their own thoughts or conversations. I think about the time the Sasquatch showed me its favorite meditation spot, a flat boulder overlooking a pristine valley. The creature would come here regularly to sit in silence, watching the sun move across the sky and the clouds drift past the distant peaks. The Sasquatch invited me to join it in this practice, and we spent hours sitting together without speaking, simply being present. At first, my mind raced with thoughts and worries, planning and analyzing, unable to settle, but the creature's profound stillness was contagious. Gradually, my thoughts slowed and quieted. I became aware of sensations I normally ignored, the feeling of air moving across my skin, the warmth of sunlight, the subtle sounds of the forest around us. I became aware of my own breathing, the rise and fall of my chest, the life force flowing through my body with each breath. The Sasquatch had taught me a form of meditation without using that word, a practice of simply being present without constantly doing or thinking or planning. This was harder than any physical challenge I'd ever faced, to simply sit and exist without needing to accomplish something or solve something or prove something, but in that difficulty lay the value. Our modern culture is so focused on constant productivity and achievement that we've forgotten how to simply be. We've lost the ability to exist peacefully in the present moment without feeling guilty or anxious about it. The Sasquatch showed me that this ability to be still and present isn't laziness or wasting time. It's a fundamental skill for mental health and spiritual well-being. After learning this practice, I began incorporating it into my own life beyond my wilderness visits. Sometimes I would sit quietly in my apartment for 30 minutes, just breathing and being present, and I found it helped tremendously with the anxiety and depression that had plagued me since my wife's death. There was also the unforgettable day when the Sasquatch taught me about gratitude and reciprocity. We were eating wild berries together when the creature did something that initially puzzled me. After consuming several handfuls of berries, the Sasquatch carefully selected a few of the ripest berries and placed them at the base of the bush, pressing them into the soil. When I looked confused, it explained, "Take gift, give thanks. Plant gives food, we give back seed." The creature was demonstrating a practice of gratitude and reciprocity. When the forest provided food, the Sasquatch didn't just take thoughtlessly, it gave thanks by planting seeds, ensuring future growth, maintaining the cycle of abundance. This was such a contrast to how humans typically interact with nature, taking what we want without thought for replenishment or the well-being of the plants and animals we harvest from. The Sasquatch taught me to always leave an offering when I took something from the forest, whether that was berries or firewood or even just the peace and beauty of the wilderness. This didn't have to be elaborate. It could be as simple as scattering seeds or pouring a little water on dry ground or arranging stones in a pattern that might shelter small insects. The specific offering mattered less than the intention behind it, the recognition that we're part of a reciprocal relationship with nature, rather than simply consumers of natural resources. I began practicing this myself, always leaving something behind when I took something from the wilderness, and I found it profoundly changed my relationship with the natural world. I felt less like an invader or exploiter and more like a participating member of the forest community. I recall the afternoon the Sasquatch taught me about fear and how to move through it rather than being paralyzed by it. We were crossing a particularly treacherous section of trail, a narrow path along a steep cliff face with a significant drop below. I froze halfway across, overwhelmed by fear of falling. The Sasquatch, who had already crossed easily, came back for me. Instead of dismissing my fear or telling me not to be afraid, the creature acknowledged it. It said, "Fear good. Fear keeps alive. But fear must not stop moving." The Sasquatch explained that fear is a useful tool for survival. It alerts us to genuine dangers and makes us more careful. But fear becomes a problem when it paralyzes us, when it prevents us from moving forward, even when moving forward is necessary. The creature taught me to work with my fear rather than against it. It showed me how to slow down and breathe deeply, how to focus on the immediate next step rather than the entire frightening journey, how to trust my body's ability to find purchase and maintain balance. With the Sasquatch's patient guidance, I managed to cross that terrifying stretch of trail. And in doing so, I learned something valuable about courage. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the ability to keep moving forward even when fear is present. This lesson extended far beyond wilderness hiking. In the months after my wife's death, I'd been paralyzed by fear. Fear of being alone, fear of never feeling happy again, fear of living a diminished and meaningless existence. The Sasquatch was teaching me that I could acknowledge those fears while still moving forward, still building a life worth living despite the grief and uncertainty. Another powerful memory involves the time the Sasquatch taught me about rest and recovery. I'd been pushing myself particularly hard, hiking longer distances than usual, trying to fill every moment with activity to avoid sitting with my thoughts and feelings. The creature noticed my exhaustion and led me to a soft patch of moss beside a quiet pool. It gestured firmly for me to lie down, and when I protested that I wasn't tired, it simply placed a hand on my shoulder and pushed me gently but firmly to the ground. The Sasquatch said, "Rest, not weak. Rest makes strong." Then it lay down beside me, and within minutes I could hear its deep, rhythmic breathing as it fell asleep. I resisted at first, my mind churning with all the reasons I should keep moving, keep doing something productive. But the creature's peaceful presence was infectious, and gradually I felt my body relaxing, my breathing slowing, my thoughts drifting. I fell into a deep sleep there on that moss, and when I woke perhaps an hour later, I felt more refreshed and restored than I had in months. The Sasquatch was sitting nearby, watching me with an expression of satisfaction. It had taught me that rest isn't weakness or laziness. It's an essential component of strength and health. Our culture glorifies constant productivity and treats rest with suspicion, as if taking time to recover is somehow shameful. But the Sasquatch understood what many humans have forgotten, that true strength comes from balancing activity with rest, exertion with recovery. We can't sustain constant output without burning out and breaking down. I needed to learn this lesson desperately, and the Sasquatch had the wisdom to teach it to me even when I resisted. There's also the memory of how the creature taught me about adapting to change and finding opportunity in difficult circumstances. We were hiking one day when we discovered that a severe storm from the previous week had knocked down several large trees across our usual path, completely blocking it. I was frustrated and disappointed, ready to turn back. But the Sasquatch was intrigued rather than discouraged. It scrambled over the fallen trees, examining them with obvious interest. The creature showed me how the fallen trees had created new habitat, opening up the forest canopy to let sunlight reach the ground, which would allow new plants to grow. Small animals would make homes in the root balls and under the bark. The decaying wood would feed fungi and insects, which would in turn feed birds and larger animals. What looked like destruction to me was actually creation, the forest renewing itself through the death of old trees and the opportunities their fall created. The Sasquatch said, "Fall not end, fall is change. Change brings new." It was showing me that what appears to be disaster or loss often creates opportunities for new growth and new possibilities if we're willing to adapt and look for them rather than clinging to the old path. This was clearly relevant to my own situation. My wife's death had felt like the end of everything meaningful in my life, like destruction of my entire world. But the Sasquatch was gently suggesting that perhaps this tremendous loss had also created space for new growth, new relationships, new understandings I couldn't have developed if my old life had continued unchanged. This was hard wisdom to accept, but I recognized the truth in it. Meeting the Sasquatch itself was only possible because I'd been driven to these mountains by grief, seeking solace in nature. If my wife had lived, I never would have had this extraordinary experience. I'm not suggesting her death was somehow good or necessary, but I was learning that even the most painful changes can eventually lead to unexpected gifts if we remain open to them. I remember the day the Sasquatch taught me about the interconnectedness of predator and prey, showing me that even death serves life in the larger ecosystem. We came across the remains of a deer that had clearly been killed by wolves several days earlier. I felt sad, seeing the scattered bones and scraps of fur, thinking about the deer's fear and pain in its final moments. But the Sasquatch directed my attention to everything else happening at that death site. Ravens and vultures had cleaned much of the carcass, feeding themselves and their young. Smaller scavengers like weasels and foxes had taken their share. Insects swarmed over the remains, breaking down what larger animals couldn't eat. Plants were already growing more lushly around the site, nourished by the nutrients returned to the soil. The deer's death hadn't been meaningless or wasteful. It had fed dozens of other creatures, supported countless lives, enriched the forest floor. The Sasquatch said, "One dies, many live, all part of circle." The creature was showing me that death is woven into the fabric of life itself, not as an enemy or a tragedy, but as an essential component of the system. The nutrients in that deer's body would eventually become part of the soil, which would feed the plants, which would feed other deer, completing the circle. Nothing was truly lost, only transformed and redistributed. This helped me think differently about my wife's death. Her body had been cremated, but the atoms that composed her had returned to the world. The energy that animated her had rejoined the universal field of consciousness and life force that flows through everything. She hadn't disappeared, she'd transformed, becoming part of the air and water and earth, part of everything around me. I think about the time the Sasquatch taught me its perspective on human civilization and technology. We were resting on a ridge where we could see a distant town, lights beginning to twinkle as evening approached. I made some comment about how beautiful civilization looked from a distance, all those lights representing human achievement and progress. The Sasquatch looked at the lights for a long time before responding. It said, "Bright, loud, fast, humans forget to be still, forget to listen, build big, feel small." The creature was offering a gentle critique of modern human society. We've built impressive cities and developed amazing technologies, but in the process, we've disconnected from the natural rhythms and relationships that sustained our species for hundreds of thousands of years. We've surrounded ourselves with artificial light and constant noise, making it nearly impossible to experience true darkness or silence. We're perpetually busy and stimulated, but often feel empty and meaningless despite all our achievements. The Sasquatch suggested that humans have forgotten how to simply be, how to exist peacefully within the natural world, rather than constantly trying to dominate and reshape it. This observation hit me hard because I recognized myself in it. Before my wife's death, I'd been completely absorbed in my career and various meaningless busy work, always stressed and rushed, rarely taking time to simply exist peacefully. Her death had forced me to stop, to step away from that frenetic pace, and ultimately that pause had led me to these mountains and this extraordinary friendship. Perhaps the Sasquatch was right, that humans had lost something essential in our rush toward progress and civilization. Perhaps we needed to recover some of that ancient wisdom about living in harmony with nature rather than in opposition to it. There's also the memorable afternoon when the Sasquatch taught me about communication beyond words. We were sitting together in comfortable silence when the creature reached out and took my hand. At first, I thought this was simply a gesture of affection, which it partly was. But as we sat there holding hands, I began to feel something unusual. It was as if emotions and impressions were flowing between us, a kind of direct transmission of feeling and understanding that didn't require language. I sensed the Sasquatch's deep contentment, its affection for me, its pleasure in this moment of connection. And somehow I knew it was sensing similar things from me, my gratitude, my peace, my joy in its presence. When we finally released hands, the creature looked at me with an expression of satisfaction. It had deliberately demonstrated that connection and communication can happen through channels beyond spoken language. Humans rely so heavily on words that we often forget about all the other ways beings can share information and emotions. Body language, facial expressions, energy and presence, even direct intuitive knowing, all of these can communicate as effectively as words, sometimes more so. The Sasquatch and I had developed this kind of non-verbal communication over our months together, learning to read each other's moods and intentions without needing constant verbal exchange. This taught me to pay more attention to these subtle forms of communication in my interactions with other humans as well, to notice what people were really feeling beneath their words, to trust my intuitive sense of situations. I recall the day the Sasquatch taught me about sacred spaces and the importance of having places set aside for contemplation and renewal. The creature led me to a small grove of ancient trees, where the light filtered through the canopy in a particularly beautiful way. Everything about this place felt different, more peaceful and charged with significance. The Sasquatch moved quietly and reverently here, and I instinctively did the same. It explained as best it could with limited words that this was a special place, somewhere its kind had come for generations to think deeply and connect with something larger than themselves. The creature said, "Quiet place, think place, feel big spirit here." The Sasquatch was describing what humans might call a sacred space or a power place, a location that seems to facilitate deeper states of consciousness and spiritual experience. Every culture has recognized such places, set them aside as temples or shrines or sacred groves. The Sasquatch's people had done the same, identifying locations where the veil between ordinary and extraordinary felt thinner, where connection to the fundamental mystery of existence felt more accessible. The creature had brought me to such a place as a profound gesture of trust and sharing, allowing me to experience the particular energy and peace that existed there. We sat in that grove for a long time, not speaking, just feeling the specialness of the location. I did feel something there, a sense of presence and significance I couldn't quite put into words, as if the trees themselves were somehow aware and benevolent. As another Sunday morning arrives and I prepare for my weekly hike, I think about that Sasquatch somewhere out there in the vast wilderness, living its long, patient life. I send my thoughts out into the world, a silent message of gratitude and love. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for teaching me when I thought I had nothing left to learn. Thank you for reminding me that we are never truly alone, that consciousness and purpose flow through all things, that love transcends every boundary we try to build around it. Years have passed since that farewell evening on the ridge, and I continue making my weekly pilgrimages into these mountains. The trails have become as familiar as the rooms of my apartment, yet they never cease to reveal something new, some fresh perspective or unexpected encounter. I've become the person the Sasquatch was trying to help me become, someone who moves through the wilderness with awareness and respect, someone who understands their place in the larger web of existence, someone who can find peace and meaning even in solitude and loss. My life has changed in countless ways since those transformative months with the creature. I left my stressful job and found work that allows me more time in nature, even if it pays less. I simplified my lifestyle, discovering I need far fewer possessions and distractions than I thought. I've developed deeper friendships with a few people who share my love of wilderness and my sense that there's far more to reality than mainstream culture acknowledges. I never speak directly about the Sasquatch to anyone, but I think my changed perspective and bearing attracts similar souls who've had their own encounters with the mysterious and inexplicable. Sometimes I meet other hikers on these trails, and occasionally I'll strike up conversations with them. I listen for hints that they might be open to deeper truths, that they might have sensed something unusual in these mountains. A few times, I've detected that particular quality of wonder and confusion that suggests someone has glimpsed something that challenged their understanding of what's possible. When I sense this, I listen carefully, neither confirming nor denying, simply holding space for their experience. I know how isolating it can be to encounter something extraordinary with no one to talk to about it, no one who will believe or understand. By simply listening without skepticism or judgment, I offer these people the validation they need, the acknowledgement that their experience was real and meaningful, even if inexplicable. The green stone the Sasquatch gave me remains on my desk where I can see it every day. It's become almost like a talisman, a physical anchor connecting me to that extraordinary time in my life. Sometimes visitors to my apartment notice it and comment on its unusual beauty, asking where I found it. I always say I discovered it on a hike, which is technically true, though it omits the most important details. That stone has become my most treasured possession, more valuable to me than anything else I own. It represents proof that magic exists, that consciousness extends far beyond human forms, that love and friendship can bridge seemingly unbridgeable divides. I've developed certain practices and rituals that help me maintain the lessons the Sasquatch taught me. Every morning I spend at least 20 minutes in silent meditation, practicing the stillness and presence the creature demonstrated. Before each meal, I take a moment to feel gratitude for the food and for the countless beings whose labor and sacrifice brought it to my plate. When I'm feeling stressed or disconnected, I hold that green stone and remember specific moments with the Sasquatch, allowing those memories to ground and center me. These practices aren't complicated or time-consuming, but they make an enormous difference in my quality of life and sense of meaning. I've also become something of an amateur naturalist, reading extensively about ecology, animal behavior, plant identification, and wilderness survival. I'm trying to build upon the foundation of knowledge the Sasquatch gave me, to become more competent at reading and understanding the natural world. The creature showed me a doorway into a different way of knowing and being, and I'm committed to walking through that doorway rather than letting it close behind me. Each book I read, each skill I develop, each observation I make deepens my connection to the wild world and helps me embody the wisdom the Sasquatch tried to share. Sometimes on my hikes, I find myself speaking aloud to the creature, as if it might still be listening somehow. I tell it about things I've learned, challenges I'm facing, moments of beauty I've witnessed. I like to think our connection remains intact, even across distance and time, that on some level beyond ordinary physical reality, the Sasquatch can still sense my thoughts and feelings directed toward it. This might be wishful thinking or self-delusion, but it brings me comfort and helps me process difficult emotions, so I continue the practice. The mountains wait as they always do, full of mysteries and teachings and connections I have yet to discover. The Sasquatch may be gone from these particular peaks, but its presence lingers in every tree and stone and stream. I am ready for whatever comes next, secure in the knowledge that I am part of something vast and beautiful and eternal. The creature taught me this truth, and I will never forget. That time in my life, those months of friendship with an impossible being, transformed me completely. I'm not the same person who first felt those eyes watching him from the forest shadows. That person was broken, lost, barely holding himself together through force of habit and stubborn refusal to give up entirely. The man I am now has been rebuilt from better materials, shaped by wisdom far older and deeper than human civilization. I carry the Sasquatch's teachings with me every day, in how I think and how I act, in how I relate to the world around me. My wife would be proud, I think. She always wanted me to slow down, to pay more attention to the present moment rather than constantly worrying about the future or dwelling on the past. She tried to teach me to appreciate simple pleasures, to find joy in small things, to live with more presence and awareness. In a strange way, her death set me on a path that finally allowed me to learn those lessons, though through a teacher neither of us could have imagined. Sometimes I wonder if there's some connection there, if perhaps her spirit somehow guided me to the Sasquatch, knowing I needed what the creature could offer. I don't know if I believe in that kind of supernatural intervention, but I don't dismiss it either. I've learned that reality contains far more mystery than I once believed possible. As I prepare for another hike on this Sunday morning, pulling on my worn boots and filling my water bottle, I feel deep contentment. Not happiness exactly, not the absence of pain or difficulty, but a fundamental sense that my life has meaning and purpose, that I'm connected to something larger than myself, that I'm exactly where I need to be. The Sasquatch gave me this gift, this sense of belonging in the world despite loss and suffering. For that, I will be eternally grateful. The wilderness calls as it always does, and I answer that call gladly, ready to see what lessons today might bring.